All right, so I'm just going to do a quick video here on using your graphing calculator to do some regression. We're going to look at problem number 33 from page 482 in order to do this. This is, again, just going to be kind of a reminder of how things work. So if you look at number 33, it gives you a table, and the table actually has an age range. So it says, using a mid-range age value for each interval, find an equation to fit the data. So we're actually going to take a look at the different the function in here and make our stats kind of fit that scenario. You can see that the numbers go up and then come back down, and so that would suggest most likely a quadratic or some sort of maybe power function wouldn't quite work necessarily, but something kind of that nature. So we're going to take a look at that first by plugging these values in. So it said pick a middle range here. So in this range would be about 20. This would be 30, 40, 50, and so on. So we're actually going to use those numbers. 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, and 75 plus years. So we'll go ahead and just do 80 for that. All right. And then if we look over at L2, for list 2, now we're going to put the mean incomes, so 14 to 68, 36, 146, 40, 47, 520, 49, 570, 46, 408, 33, 286, and last 24, 396. All right, and you can't see any of that. Sorry about that. See if this helps at all. There we go. Typed it all in. All right, so there's all the numbers from this list over here. What I want to do with this first is get a plot of it so I can see kind of where things are. So I'm going to go to second and then the y equals button, and that takes me to the stat plot. I noticed that this plot is actually already on for me, but you do want to make sure to go in there and make sure that it's on. And then we have to make sure our lists are designated correctly. If I just typed my stuff into list 1 and list 2, then that's what should be showing up on my stat plot. If I typed it into a different list, then I should be using, right now it says alpha, and so down here, this is actually my second button, but if I hit second and then the 1 button, that'll actually put L1 in there, and L2 and L3 and so on. So just as an example, if list 4 was my X list, then I hit second and the 4 button, and list 4 pops up. Obviously for me, I actually had list 1 there, so I should make sure list 1 is what I'm using. So now I can go to the graph, and if my graph is not showing, it's probably because I don't have the right range here. These ranges are from 20 to 80. These were from 14,000 to 25,000, so, or not 25,000 actually, up to 50,000. So I'm going to go zoom, and if I choose, oh, lots of options there. If I choose zoom stat, which is option 9, and hit enter, now it's going to kind of focus in on my statistics. All right, and it's kind of get some information there. That definitely does not look like exponential or linear. I could fit it to an exponential or linear, but it's just not going to work. So what I want to do then is I want to go to my stat button again, and this time I want to calculate my statistics. I want to calculate a quadratic regression. Remember, quadratic means that it's an x squared sort of polynomial. So I'm going to hit enter on that. And for this calculator, it shows me which lists I'm choosing, and it actually gives me some options for a frequency list, which we don't need to do right now. Store regression equation. If I want my regression equation to be stored in a specific spot, like I want it to graph in Y1, for instance, then this is where I would want to do that. So if your calculator has these options right here where it says store regression equation, you should put Y1. The way you do that is you go to vars, you go over to yvars, go to function, and you can see all the y's listed there, and we want to use Y1 as our regression equation line. After I get down here to calculate, it's going to calculate all those things. It's also going to send my equation over to y1. So if I were to go over to my y equals menu in y1, here's my regression equation. If I go to quit, well, I'll do it again. Let's go ahead and enter. Okay, here's my regression stuff that showed up. Remember, the formula then for this depends on how I want you to round, but rounding to the nearest hundredth, my formula would be negative 34.14x squared plus 3,497.73x minus 39,949.71 is what my equation would actually look like. This r squared tells me that it's a pretty good fit, 0.96. Has a pretty good R value. Remember, we're trying to get close to 1, or if it was negative, we'd want it to be close to negative 1. So that's working out pretty well. If I go to my graph, then I should be able to see my quadratic regression showing up there. Now, for those of you that didn't have that option, I'm going to go back here. Those of you that did not have that option of typing in y1 in your regression equation, you can actually do it here. What yours will do is, I'll just do this. Okay, this is what yours will do. If you go to stat, you go to quadratic regression, it's going to type it in your main screen. And from here, you just need to do which list you're going to use for your x variable, L1, which list you're going to do for your y variable, which is L2. Again, that's second, and then the 2 button does L2. And then if you put another comma and you do the vars thing that I showed earlier, so you go to vars, go to yvars, choose from function, choose y1, then when you're over here at the very end and you type that in, then it's going to put y1 in there, and that is going to send it to be the regression equation in your y equals menu. Okay, so it's a little different than what I showed you guys in class the other day. At the same time, if I don't have I'm going to clear this out. If my regression equation is not shown up in here, and I want to do it from my y equals menu, then I'm going to go to vars, statistics, EQ, and reg EQ. My regression equation is listed there. That's now the last regression that I've done, so we want to make sure that we've completed, we've gone through the stat and gone through the regression first before we try to put it in here. But then it shows up. All right, now I want to remind you that there's different types of regression. So if I go to my stat button, I go over to calc, there are all these choices: linear, quadratic, cubic, quartic, a different type of linear. This LN is natural log regression or logarithmic regression, exponential regression, power regression, there's another logistic one, sine regression, so it's a periodic function like a sine function. And then manual fit we probably won't do, but it is an option. I'm going to take a look at this. When I looked at this plot earlier, and go back to the graph, when I looked at that plot, it looked to me like I might actually be able to fit a cubic on that. So if I go over to my stat, go to calc, I'm going to go down to cubic regression, and I'm going to do a cubic regression. I'm going to put the yvar, I'm going to put it in y2, so I have a separate regression equation there. And it's going to do all the calculations, but what's really interesting is that, look at the r squared. Now it's 0.993, basically. That's an even better regression than I was getting with my quadratic regression. And so if I go to my graph, you'll see here's my quadratic graphing right now, and the next one that graphs is going to be my cubic. Follows pretty well the same path early on, but right here it's going to just hit those numbers enough. If I were to zoom out, you would see that this cubic function, I'm going to zoom out over here so it's easier to see stuff. You'll see that this cubic function, when it graphs, is going to kind of do a little bit of a curve back up at some point. There it is. So that allowed for a little bit tighter fit to that data. Now, obviously, it depends on what you're doing here. If you are pretty certain that your data should go all the way down and zero out again at some point, well, then you probably want a quadratic expression. If, however, you think that your data will later down the road trend back upwards, then you'd want a cubic function to fit it. This is why people might say that statistics isn't real math. All right, they might want to say, well, you just kind of make it what you want it to. And that is partially true. And so when you listen to statistics on in the news or other things like that, you have to be really careful that you're paying attention to how the study was done and how likely it is that they were trying to do it what we would call ethically versus just doing it to try and prove their point. Because you can make statistics say just about anything you want to. And that's why we need critical minds when we're listening to stuff. That's why we try to teach you statistics and things like that when you're in high school and maybe even a little bit in middle school and of course in college, because we want you to be informed as to what's actually happening out there and not just take things at face value. There you go. You got my little soapbox for a little bit. Hopefully that was a helpful reminder as to how to do those simple functions in your calculator, and that'll give you enough ability to do your assignment from here. I hope that's it. Have a great e-learning day. I'll talk to you on Friday.